back to another Swift tutorial. Today we're going to be doing something that's been requested quite a lot in the comments, and that is a side menu follow-up video. And we're going to look at how to set up this side menu, but more importantly, we're going to look at how to actually hook up the menu items so you can switch controllers. Each of these controllers are different colors. It's not the same view that we are just updating the color in. So we're going to look at how to set up the menu again, some good practices of how to actually pass in the items you want to configure, how to add the swipe gesture as well as the button up here. So you can think of this as a part 2 to the other video. If you haven't seen it, it's actually also a good primer because I go through the basic setup as well. So that said, make sure you absolutely destroy that like button down below for the YouTube algorithm. Helps me make more videos for all of you. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Hit subscribe while you're at it. Let me stop blabbering on and let's jump right into the video. Quick pause before we get into the video. If you haven't seen it already, I am hard at work putting together iOSacademy.io, a community where all of us iOS engineers can come together, learn how to build some of the top apps like Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, in addition to interview prep to land some of these iOS roles at top tech companies. So if you're interested in the free and premium content to come, head on over to iOSacademy.io and enter your email address in the waitlist form, and you will be notified as content becomes available. That said, let's get into the video. All right, so let's get started by creating a new Xcode project. We'll stick with the single view application, and we're going to call this project My Side Menu. We will save it. Let's put it on our desktop. Works for now. And the very first thing that we want to do before we actually get into writing our own code is open up Terminal and bring in the dependency to create the side menu. And we're going to do it with CocoaPods as we usually do. So go ahead and open up Terminal and do a Command W on your Xcode project since we're going to open up the workspace. CD into your project folder, and you want to do a pod init, which will initialize CocoaPods for this project. Thereafter, you want to do open pod file, and the CocoaPod that you want to bring in is pretty simple. It's called side menu, which is a pretty straightforward name. So make sure this P is lowercase over here so you don't hit any errors. So once you have that, you can close up text edit and you can run pod install. This will install the dependency. It should be fairly quick. And once it has successfully installed, you can open up the project name .xc workspace. And let me expand my Xcode window to give ourselves a little more room to work. Let's also expand all of the project tree over here. And before we actually start doing any code or making any changes, let's select a simulator and hit run to make sure this CocoaPod doesn't break anything out of the box. All right, cool, it doesn't break anything. The very first thing that we're gonna want to do is embed this controller in a navigation controller. So we have a bar up here, and more importantly, so we have a menu button in this corner. We'll also look at the swipe to expose the menu and the menu items and how to navigate to the different controllers as you saw in the beginning of the video, seeing as that's the most requested thing from you guys. But anyways, to get started, come on over to your storyboard, select this controller that you have here, come up to the toolbar and hit editor, and you want to embed this in a navigation controller. That'll give you the bar up here. So in the bar, we're simply going to say home. And as we change different screens based on what we tap in the menu, we'll also go ahead and change the title up here, as you'll see. So, whoops, we don't want that. Let's close that. Let's open up the object menu here, which is this plus at the top to get your items, and grab a bar button item and drag it into this corner. By default, it gives you this item text, but let's open up the attributes inspector, which is this right panel. Delete the title for the button, and you want to bring in one of these standard symbols, and I think it's called 3 lines or something along those naming conventions. I think it's called horizontal or line.horizontal.3. That's what you want to find and bring in here. We also want to add an IB action to our controller that we can call once the button is tapped. So go to your view controller and bring in a IB action, and I'm going to call it did tap menu button. And let's go back to the storyboard. And let's right click on this in our controller and drag from this action we created to the button. And hit Command R, and that should be the only thing we need to do in the storyboard. The rest of it is code, and it's pretty simple. So there is our button. Obviously tapping it, nothing happens yet. So let's go to the controller. And the first thing we want to do to use the framework that we brought in is import it. So it's called side menu. We also want a menu itself. So we're going to say private let side menu is a side menu navigation controller. We're going to instantiate it with a root view controller. And for now, we'll just pass in a blank view controller. We're going to change this in a little bit to get our custom menu showing, but let's just go with this for now. We need to do some customization on this guy. Particularly, you want to say the direction. So we're going to say left side is true. And you also want to allow the user to swipe to open up the menu. So you're going to want to do side menu, manager, default. And you're going to want to set the left menu navigation controller to your side menu. And what else? You also want to add a pan gesture to swipe to open up that menu. So again, off of the side menu manager.default, you want to add a pan gesture to present the controller. And I think you can just add a pan gesture generally, and you don't have to specify the direction. So we're going to say add pan gesture for view, which is this view controller's view. And when we tap the button, we also want to show the side menu. So we're going to say present side menu animated true. And that's actually all you need to show the side menu. So if you hit Command R and hit this button, you'll see that it opens up here. And right now, there's nothing in here, obviously. And we can also swipe to open it, and we can swipe to close it. So let's actually talk about putting stuff in here and then using that stuff to change our screen here, which should be, every single screen should be proper design-wise a separate controller. So we can keep our code modular and kind of efficient. So what I basically want to now do is create another controller, which is going to have a table view in it. And that controller will essentially show a list of items. And then we're going to create a delegate to tell this controller what we tapped on so it can change its contents. So it's easier to see, I think, in practice. So we're going to say class menu controller. And you could make this a UI view controller and put a table view in here. Another cleaner way to do it is you could make a table view controller. And this will actually start complaining in a second. If you hit Command B, actually, I guess it won't. We need to implement a couple functions in here. So the first thing we're going to want to implement is view did load. View, that's not what we want. View did load. Call super view did load. We're also going to want the table view function. So we're going to want number of rows. And we're going to want cell for row at index path, cell for row at index path. And we're also going to want the table view function that gets called when we tap a cell. So we're going to say did select cell. That's not what we want. Did select, let's see, table view did select. I don't know why the autocomplete decides to just not work 99% of the time. So did select row at index path. And let's go ahead and implement this stuff. So one thing that we want to do is, actually, we don't even need the view to load now that I think about it. We do want a custom initializer so we can initialize this menu controller with some contents. So let's go ahead and add a custom initializer. So I'm just going to say init, and we're going to say with menu items, and let's just make this an array of strings. And we're going to add menu items in here as a property that needs to get initialized like that. We need to call super.init, and we're going to use the one with a nib name and pass a nil for the bundle and the nib name. And you, of course, also want to assign your menu items to your menu item property. And in number of rows, we can basically return menu items.count. We can also, for the cell, what we can do is we can dequeue a cell. So we're going to say let cell equals table view dequeue reusable cell for reusable cell with identifier. And let's pass in identifier string, which will be cell for index path. And we'll need to register this ID, which we'll do in a second. And we can say cell.textLabel.text will be the nth element in our menu item collection that we passed in. Finally, we can return the cell. And when we tap on a menu item, we want to do two things. We want to first deselect that row because it'll be highlighted, and we want to deselect it with an animation. And then we want to relay back to the kind of container controller that presented the menu, which is this guy, that we've selected an item. So do what you need to do with it, which in our case, what we want to do is close the menu and show a different controller. So we're going to say relay to delegate about menu item selection. So let's see. Let's go ahead and register this cell identifier that I've used here. And this is complaining because we need to bring in a required initializer when we create our own custom. So you can hit the error, then just hit fix. And the other thing we're going to do is in the initializer, we can register, rather we have to register a cell for a cell identifier. We're going to use the standard UI table view cell.self for an identifier. And that identifier we use down below is called cell. So go ahead and put that string in there. And let's see. Let's go ahead and before we continue, let's come in here and for our root view controller, we're now going to pass in this new one that we created. So I'm going to say menu controller, and we want to initialize it with our custom initializer. And let's do home, info, and let me actually put this on a new line maybe for each of these elements. Home, info, settings, and of course it's going to mess up the alignment. So let's say Control I to fix that. Home, info, settings, and I think that should be good enough for now. Let's just stick with these three. We'll add more as we figure out how to actually show different screens. Go ahead and hit Command R to build and run. And if you hit this now, in here, you'll see that we have our items. Now, of course, we have the background color as white because that's the standard table view background color. So let's change that. And let's also talk about tapping these and having, the view change. So let's figure out that background color first, since it's kind of bothering me. So we're going to say table view dot background color, and let's do system. Let's do, I don't know, let's do black. Why not? I kind of want a dark and gray, but I don't know how dark it is actually. So we'll take a look at it in a second. And we also want to say view.background color, which is actually the same as the background color above, but we'll just do it for a sanity check. And then on the cell, we're going to say cell.textLabel.textColor. And we want this to be white. And cell.background color will do, whoops, we want background color. We'll do clear. Go ahead and hit Command R to build and run. Let's make sure that looks correct. All right, we still have white, so that's not what we want. So let's figure out what the heck is making the background white. So we have our cell background color. Let's change the background color to also be that dark gray. And let's also change the content views background color to also be a dark gray. Go ahead and hit Command R. Let's try that one more time. Okay, so we got this part looking good. And in this thing, we have our background color as that. We have our table view background color we're assigning. Let's move these into view did load. Not that it should matter, but go ahead and override view did load and put those in there. And let's make sure that color looks correct. Okay, now we're looking good. The reason it wasn't working in there is because our actual view is not unsigned at that point in time. So we need to put it in the view did load lifecycle. And I'm also going to change this color to be a little bit darker using the RGB initializer on a UI color. So you can initialize it with floats. So I'm going to do 33 over 255, which I believe is a fairly dark gray just because this kind of looks ugly right now and it's going to bother me for the rest of the video. And I'm also going to make this a constant so we can reuse it. So we're going to say color equals this thing, control I to align it. And let's assign this to be color, this to be color. Let's also do that for this and this. Hit Command R. Hopefully this looks nicer and we can move on with our lives. All right, looking good. So how on earth do we get the selection out of this menu controller? So it's quite simple actually. We are going to add a property on here on the menu controller, and it's going to be a delegate. And we're going to create a delegate. So let's add a protocol right here. And this will be menu controller delegate. It'll have a function, did select menu item named, and we're going to pass back a string. And this delegate will be a menu item or menu controller delegate optional, like that. And basically, every time we select an item, this table view function gets called. We're simply going to say, let selected item, we can pull out of the collection of menu items, and it's the thing that was selected. And this index path is coming in as a parameter right here. And then we can call on the delegate, that function we added, and pass in the selected item. So that's what we need to do in the menu part. And now in the part that presents the actual menu, we can assign the delegate so we can use it. So we can say side menu dot delegate itself, and you'll get an error once you do this because it'll say that this controller does not conform, view controller does not conform to this menu controller delegate. So we're going to have it conform. So I'm going to put menu controller delegate up here. This will start complaining that we don't actually have this functionality in here. So hit the arrow and hit fix, and it'll stub out that function. And we're going to move it down. And let's see why this is complaining. Actually, so we don't want to set the delegate off of this. I lied. That's my mistake. We added the delegate off of the menu controller, which is the root controller of the side menu. So what we're going to actually do is take this whole assignment, cut it from here. The side menu is going to be side menu navigation controller optional. Make sure you make this a var so it's mutable. And we're going to assign the side menu down here. So go ahead and paste everything just cut down here. And the reason we're going to do that now is because we need to assign. So let's actually get rid of this. Now we actually need this. Let's put an optional here. And we're going to have to do a force unwrap on this. But the reason we had to put it in here is we want to use self as the menu controller delegate. So let's make this menu, and let's define the menu up here like that. And we can say menu.delegate. And if you take a look at that, it's menu controller delegate. We want this to equal self. So what we kind of just did, since I moved around a decent amount of code, is we made this property on our main controller optional. We assign it in view.load because we need to reference self once the view has loaded, and you can't do that up here. And we created this custom initializer in our menu controller down here so it can take in the items we want to show in the menu. When a cell is selected in the menu, we basically use the delegate and its function that we defined right here to relay back to whoever the delegate is. In this case, it's this function, and will come into this function. Now in here, what we can say is whenever this function is called, we want to call dismiss on the side menu. So we can say side menu dot dismiss. No, that's not what we want. We want dismiss animated. I just saw it. Dismiss animated true completion nil. And what we actually can do is we could just do it in the completion, Once the menu has dismissed, based on whatever the selection is, we want to go to that screen. So if you take a look at the items we put in, we have home, info, and settings. So we can say if named equals home, do this, otherwise do this, otherwise do that. And let's make sure our strings are case sensitive as well as obviously what we are passing in up here. And what I'm going to do in here for now is I'm simply going to say, I'm simply going to change the background color of this view. So let's add a weak self here. And we're going to say weak self in, and we're going to say self.view.background color. And in this case, we'll do white. And let's just copy and paste this. This case, we'll do red. And in this case, we'll do green. So go ahead and hit Command R to build and run. And the next piece of this obviously will be changing the controller, not just the background color, so not to worry. I just wanted to make sure we can do this so we can all be on the same page. So we control this controller now based on our selection in the menu. And kind of the code flow that's going on, like I mentioned, is because we've set the delegate for our menu content controller that we're passing in here, whenever we select an item via the delegate, we relay back, here's what was selected. And let's also make sure that works for that third item, which it does. So instead of changing the color, we want to change the controller. So how do we do that? Well, it's actually quite simple. We want to use something called compositional child controllers. Basically, you want to nest controllers as children controllers of this view controller class. And based on whichever item is selected, you're going to selectively hide and show controllers. So in this case, we have our home screen, we have our info controller and settings. So for home, we can just use this controller. And then we can create a child controller for settings and a child controller for info. So let me go ahead and do that really fast. And let me put this in another code file, just so it can be a little cleaner. And also I'll upload this code so you guys can reference it. So I'm gonna do new file. And we're gonna stick with a Swift file is okay for now. And we'll call this side menu. Let's paste in all that code in here. Make sure you go ahead and import UI kit, since we're using UI stuff in here, and hit Command B, make sure it's still compiling. And let's create 2 more controllers. So new file, Cocoa Touch class. You want a subclass of a UI view controller, if I can spell it correctly. First one we're going to do is an info view controller. Very simple. And we're just going to assign a background color to this. Let's make it red. And then we want another controller, so new file, and we are going to do settings, view controller. Go ahead and delete that commented code in here as well. Let's bring that curly back, and let's set the background color in here as well, and we'll do blue. Now we want to go back to that main view controller where our menu stuff is, and we want to add child controllers. So that's very, very simple to do. We first want to define properties for them. So we're going to say settings controller will be our settings controller. And we also want one for our info view controller. So we're going to say info controller. And we're going to create another function, which is going to add child controllers. And we're going to call that at the bottom of view.load. And basically what we want to do is we first want to add the views to this screen, and then we also want to call the add child nodes. So the first thing we'll do is, I guess we can just call add child, and we want to add a child controller. The first one we'll do is settings, self.settings controller, and we also want the info controller. We actually don't even need this self. The other thing that you want to do is you want to add the views for these controllers. So you're going to say view, add subview, settings controller, dot view. You also want to add the view for the info controller. And what else do you want to do? You want to set the frame of those views. So you're going to say settings controller.view.frame is the bounds of the current screen. Do that for info controller as well. And very important, you need to call did move. And you're going to call those off of these controllers so you can specify the life cycle. So you're going to say settings controller did move to parent. Parent in this case is self. And same thing on the info controller. So I actually have a different video talking about these container controller patterns. Basically, you're adding a child controller as a child to this view controller. You're also adding its view as a subview. You're setting the view's frame to be the entirety of the screen of this controller size. And then on both of those controllers, you're telling them, hey, you've moved to be a child under parent, and parent is self. And the reason these two lines are very important is in these controllers, these lifecycle functions like view did load or view did appear, they get called based on these two did move to parent. So it's very important that you include these and don't forget them. Now, the other thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to hide the views for its settings and info. So you're going to say settings controller view is hidden is true. Same thing for info. And you can probably guess now what we want to do in this guy. When it's home, we want to hide both info and settings controller screens. And we can get rid of the background color stuff. When the user selects info, what we want to do is we want to say settings is hidden, but info controller view is not hidden. And vice versa, when we select settings, we want to do basically the opposite. We want to say settings controller view is hidden as false, and the info controller is hidden as true. And the other thing I'll do is we want to also update the navigation controller title up here to reflect the screen that we're on. And we're getting that as a string, right? So we can literally say self.title, self.title equals whatever the named property is that's coming in. So let's go ahead and hit Command R to build and run, make sure it works. And then I'll also maybe, I think we're doing okay on time. I'll also talk about how to refactor this to be a little cleaner. So we're on home, we select home, we're still here. So we select info, and you can see this changed to info, and this is red now. And we're not setting anything red in here. Where we're setting red is actually in the info view controller. So if I go to this info view controller, you can see we're setting red in here, and I think settings was blue. Yep, settings is blue. So now if we go to here and do settings, we're actually not getting anything. Oh, settings is black, just kidding, I can't type today. So let's hit blue and try that one more time. Settings is blue. Okay, perfect. So we're definitely changing controllers. Your code is still memory efficient. You can still separate your screens and don't have to use just like simple views because A, that's not memory efficient, and B, it becomes a monstrosity of like a size of a class. So this is how you separate stuff out and change your controllers. Very common pattern. Your menu still works on every single screen, and the reason is you're using your view controller.swift as a container of sorts for your other controllers. So what I like to do is I like to call this something along the lines of container view controller, just to be more descriptive. And the one last thing that I'll cover in this video, since might as well, since we've gotten this far, is using strings in our menu, in our side menu, which I put in this file, is a little brittle. So we instantiate it with like this array of strings. So instead of doing this, what you could do, what I like to often do, is create an enum. So we'll do something like side menu item, and you can put basically your cases in here. So we're going to have home, and let's say it's equal to a raw value of home. Info is equal to info. Settings is equal to settings. Put string up here to be a raw value. And basically, you can pass in an array of side menu items, and you need to change your table view function. see if I can find it right here, to be this dot raw value, and you also want to change the definition of this property to be an array of your side menu item. And let's see, what else do we have to do? We also need to change our protocol so we can send back the menu item that we selected rather than a string. And I think this is looking good in here. Then we also need to go change all this stuff in our container controller. So the first thing that we want to change is this delegate function. And let's comment this stuff out for a quick second. And this is going to be named .raw value. And we also want to change this. So instead of passing in an array of these strings, you can pass in side menu. And if you go to your actual side menu enum declaration, what you can do is you can have this conform to a protocol called case iterable, which allows you to use all cases. And in the view controller, you can say this is side menu dot all cases. I'm pretty sure you can do that. Let's see. Let's hit Command B because Xcode is deciding to be dumb right now. So hit Command B, let it compile. Let's try that again. There it is. So we want side menu item dot all cases. That'll pass in all of them in the order that they are defined. Now the reason this gives you type safety is instead of doing this if else nonsense, you can do a switch on the named, and admittedly named is a very bad parameter name. I would call it menu item probably. And you can do things like home, info, and settings. And of course, you can bring your code that you were executing down below into each of these respective blocks. That part does not change. Let me actually uncomment this whole thing before we do that. And what you could also do, and I probably won't do it in this video since it's getting kind of long, you can in fact, instead of even using an enum, you can create a view model for each of these menu item selections. And instead of hard coding which controllers get hidden for which case, you could just create a view model and pass that in directly into here and into your constructor for the menu controller, the one that provides the content. And that way you can actually just relay back to the delegate via the delegate that, hey, here's the item that I selected and here's the associated controller that I want to show. So if you hit Command B, let's hit Command R now, make sure it runs, and we should have the same functionality, but our code is more type safe. So we can open this up. Also, you can get rid of this little snippet navigation title thing up here by just setting the navigation bar to hidden for this menu controller. Kind of ugly. I don't know why it shows by default. But let's go ahead and change to info. Changes it to info. Same for settings. You can see it's a little delayed when we tap it. It closes and then it changes. The reason is because we put this whole thing in the completion block for the menu dismiss call. So if you want it to be more immediate, you can do that and move all that code right below it and just drop the self question mark since things are no longer optional. And do this as the last thing. I'll wrap up this video. Whoops, we want to get rid of this and this and this and that. So go ahead and hit Command R. Now you'll see that the change of controller is more immediate as soon as you select it. So by the time the menu closes, it's already on the different controller screen. And of course, you can use the menu item to open it up. You can pan and so on and so forth. To actually customize this, because I know someone's gonna ask this in the comments, you basically want to create a custom table view cell and register it to the table. So if you're not familiar with table views, I encourage you to watch my other videos on table views. This menu is nothing more than a very basic table view. And we're using the basic table view cell in here. If you want to have icons, you can do that. If you want to make the font size bigger, you can do that. As you add things in the menu, because it's a table view controller, it stays scrollable. And I think you get left navigation support for free. So here we rotated it. You can hit Command left or right arrow and it rotates. And if you're in landscape mode, fully supported, it takes care of the safe area for the notch and stuff. So yeah, there you have it. That's how you add a navigation controller side menu to your app, as well as hook it up to change one of many screens in your controller. So that said, if you haven't smashed that like button down below already for the YouTube algorithm, make sure to do so. If you're new to the channel and haven't subscribed, or if you've been here and haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Helps me make more videos for all of you. Comment down below if you have any questions or concerns, errors. I try to reply to every comment within a few days. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.